Okay, so this video lesson will be discussing economic integration, which is a process where countries coordinate and link their economic policies. It can be identified as being bilateral or multilateral, which just means that the amount of countries that are participating in it. And a bilateral agreement is only between two nations, and a multilateral is between a bigger group of nations. We'll also be looking at the 6 steps which economic integration can be identified as being under, and some of the pros and cons of this. The first step of economic integration is a PTA, or a preferential trading area. Under a PTA, certain products from certain countries have tariffs reduced or removed, so it only applies to certain goods and services and only from certain countries. For example, Indonesia and Pakistan have a PTA where certain goods such as Indonesian palm oil and some fruits from Pakistan that they specialize in producing have no tariffs. This makes it easier and cheaper for the countries to import and therefore increases trade from both sides. The next step of economic integration are free trade areas. Here, instead of only certain goods from other countries in the agreement being removed from tariffs and other forms of protectionism, here all goods will be removed. So trade between both countries will be greatly increased with all goods, not just in certain sectors. So trade will increase across different economic sectors. However, one thing that you're going to see as you move up to the next steps of economic integration is a loss of freedom and autonomy. But here, countries still have the freedom to trade with other countries that are not in the agreement and make their own policies regarding those countries as they wish. The next step of economic integration are custom unions, where members still have free trade between themselves, but they're no longer capable of making their own policy about trading with other countries outside the agreement. For example, if you want to trade with another country, the bloc as a whole will decide what kind of forms of protectionism are going to be placed on the other country. The European Union has a custom union. It's beyond the custom union, but it also serves as an example of a custom union. After this comes the common market, and I'll keep using the European Union as an example since it's already been through all these steps. And the common market has all the features of a custom union, except it also has common policies on product regulation. So, for example, the union as a whole would decide on certain products which they would not allow to come in for various reasons. They may believe it's harmful. For example, countries would not make their own policy on whether they can import a certain type of food or use a certain type of paint if the union decides that it's negative for health. The union as a whole would ban it. There's also free movement of goods, services, capital, and labor. You see this in the EU. For example, lots of low paid workers from the Eastern European countries that are in the EU come to the Western European countries for low wage jobs such as strawberry picking and other agricultural services since there's less jobs available in the East, so they come to the West to be able to make a living. This has benefits as it's able to provide producers in various EU countries with the labor capital that they need, but it also has some drawbacks. As a lot of the poorer countries in the Union will see their skilled labor go to the richer countries easier, which creates something called a brain drain, where all the skilled labor, the educated people, will leave the poor countries, which keeps them poor in the long run. But it does help the economic well being of those laborers that are moving to the West. The next step is economic and monetary union, which keeps all the features of a common market, but it also adds a common currency. So in the European Union, not all the countries are in this, but there's the Eurozone, where the euro as a common currency is implemented. So the countries that are in the Eurozone have an economic and monetary union. So the euro specifically is a good example of this because economic and monetary union has pros and cons. One pro, it really depends on the situation that these countries are facing. If the united currency will be strong in a large proportion of the global market. This union will be helpful. And you see that in the euro. The euro is one of the top, most highly valued currencies on the world currency market, foreign exchange markets, and it has a occupies a large proportion of this foreign exchange market. It's also positive if there's large fluctuations in the exchange rates of the countries that are in the common economic and monetary union, which is the case for the eurozone as well, because you see some previously countries had very different status with regards for their currency. You had some stronger currencies such as the franc, and then some weaker ones, like I believe Greece used the drachma before the euro, which was weaker. So some countries are not benefited equally. Weaker countries tend to get more out of agreements such as this. And finally, another thing to look at is the business confidence. The euro helped boost business confidence in the EU, but once again, it helped some countries more than others. Like Greece, where business confidence was lower than someplace like Germany or France, was helped more by this economic and monetary union. And the final step of economic integration is complete economic integration. Here, countries have no control over economic policy. They're in a monetary union, which means they have unified monetary policy for controlling macroeconomic objectives. So you'll see that interest rates will be unified. They have a common central bank, so obviously a common currency. But the defining characteristic here is that their fiscal policy is united. So taxation, spending, these are going to be controlled by the bloc. One negative of this is that there's a loss of sovereignty, which can sometimes countries will be facing different situations, but there's going to be one policy for all of them. In 2012, I'll use Greece again. Greece went through a crisis, and other countries had to essentially bail Greece out and change their fiscal policy because of Greece. So this leads to loss of goodwill because other countries that are in a good situation, like Germany, sees themselves as being used or the giving partner in this relationship, as if they're giving more than they're getting essentially from the union. I've already started to get into this, but there's benefits, pros and cons of economic integration. Some benefits are that uniting these markets will create a larger market, greater export market. This will help producers from all the different countries, especially export industries, be able to export more since there's a greater market, not hindered by any protectionist policies. There's also going to be more consumer choice and lower prices, which is caused by increased competition. There's going to be more employment opportunity. As I discussed earlier, some countries in Eastern Europe have a lot of surplus labor, overskilled labor. They've invested in education, but there simply isn't the jobs for those educated people. So they have overeducated people working in under jobs they're overqualified for. But some other richer countries in Western Europe have these jobs available for them, so they're able to go there. Trade negotiations trade negotiations are easier globally and internally because now you're not dealing with more countries, you're dealing with less. These countries are acting as a bloc. So let's say if the European Union and the ASEAN, which is in Southeast Asia, can negotiate a trade agreement, that's a lot easier since they're working as two separate blocks instead of 50 different countries trying to negotiate a deal. It also leads to trade creation. Because protectionism will fall, countries inside the bloc will be able to produce where they have comparative advantage. This is going to hurt some countries, however, or I'll get into that later, but there's going to be greater efficiency since without protectionism, the countries that have comparative advantage are going to be able to use that comparative advantage, so production will move there. That's going to lead to more efficiency inside the bloc. Some cons we've already discussed, such as the loss of sovereignty and how sometimes the stronger economies have to support the weaker ones. But some other cons include that the bloc, where economic integration took place, will often use protectionism against non-bloc members. So discriminatory trade practices against countries that are not integrated in the agreements. Domestic industry can also be hurt because, as I discussed earlier with the trade creation, these industries are now the firms are going to move to where there's comparative advantage in producing a certain good or service. So, industry that was inefficient is now going to be hurt, which can lead to problems inside the country where industry is leaving. For example, Italian manufacturing suffered in the 1990s as because of the EU, it moved offshore to other European countries and countries outside of Europe as well, but the EU helped accelerate the process because they no longer had comparative advantage in manufacturing those goods. But if protectionism was still in place, they perhaps could have kept the manufacturing sector alive for longer. And when these industries fall, it leads to unemployment and macroeconomic issues inside of that country.